everyone. Good afternoon. Hoping you're having a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time and day it may be where you are. Can everyone hear me okay? The sound and the video look okay? Hello, Gringo Pig from Edinburgh, and Lee from Waterbury, RJ from Sweden. Yeah, I am Inga from Sweden. Sorry, RJ. Some things just get in the culture. And J Bognap from Muskego, Wisconsin. Andy K from Fort Riley, Kansas. John L from New Haven, Connecticut. Glad everyone could join me. Uncle Meat says, "Hey Lyle, home studio. I could always just unplug it, but what are your thoughts about amps and lighting?" I don't know what your question there really is. Are you having lighting interference? I'll be glad to help if I can, but I don't understand what the question is. Hello to everyone, St. Paul, Tampa, Bristol. It's just amazing that we have people from all over the place. This is so cool. Questions really sometimes don't have enough context. William Gombert, I'm not throwing you under the bus, but which WGS speaker would I recommend for MIJ? I don't know what you mean by MIJ. Bork, bork, bork. Wow, people from everywhere. From Leeds. All right. I need to grab the junior then. Hello, James from Scotland. Previous live chat, I was having two issues with this acoustic. Number one, the A was sharp, that it would not intonate. Change strings. That's all fixed. I think I had a bum A string in that set, but the other issue was pain doing bar chords. I have changed to D'Addario, just regular phosphors, 11 through 50, I think they are, and that has helped an awful lot. That, and I gave my left hand and wrist about 3 days off, and they were all wrapped up. So this guitar is back to playing as it should, and I'm almost back to playing as I should. Paulsboro, Washington. Ed Kaplan asked, has an AC30 S1 ever made it to your repair desk? Curious about your thoughts on this amp. I have not had an S1 come in yet. The amps that I get in typically are amps that people are using. And I don't know if I don't know how well the S1 has sold in comparison to the C2. When one comes in, I'll be glad to look at it. As far as I know, it's just the top boost channel with reverb, no trim. And good morning, Brad. Very early where you are. Thanks for joining us, mate. With some solid state stuff of unknown to me yet quality as far as an effects loop and stuff goes. So I hope it's great. Don Desvega asks, what do you most often do with the old ones when a customer's amp gets a speaker change? Also still thinking / drooling about your Thanksgiving dishes you mentioned last time. Well, thank you, Des. Usually I give the old speaker back to the customer. It's still their speaker, and they can keep it for a different amp, or they can sell it if it still works, or they can use it to prop open a door, but that is their potential property. So it all goes back unless they say, I don't want it, dump it. As far as the Thanksgiving dishes, I might do a few non-curricular videos later this week with some of those recipes, one or two at least. People seem to like them, not to the point where I'm going to change focus and be a cooking channel, but it does build a sense of who I am, and I think people like that. Plus, they're really tasty. And the questions are coming in, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll try to. Lori Sukanen Hi from Finland. Any thoughts on high power single-ended tube amps? Tried to find your Bob Jika video from video, but not could not find it. I think it's a photo gallery rather than a video. It's somewhere on there. Um, um, uh, high end, high power single-ended tube amps are kind of let's do it because it's possible rather than let's do it because it's the best way to do it. It's not the best way to get high wattage. It takes a lot of current to do a high wattage single-ended amp, and there's a lot of noise issues. And if you really want the Class A thing, the true Class A thing, it can be worth it. But there's a reason the industry as a whole went to push pull outputs for more power. I think high power single-ended amps are pretty much a novelty. Um, Sorry if that hurts anyone's feelings. Doug Ullman says, amp tech playing an acoustic. Paradoxical. Well, yeah, I play amps all day long. When I punch off the clock, I grab this or my Eastman HD28 copy. And this is my time. This is my thing. And I don't have to plug it in and I don't have to worry about the neighbors hearing it or anything. And if I just played electric, I would not learn as many songs. Jonathan Shop asks, should I consider getting a baffle? My ears seem sensitive to frequency more than volume. Any ideas for a baffle if one might help? You can baffle things. You can also just turn it around and have it face the sofa if necessary, if you're sensitive to high frequencies. But I can't answer that question for you other than to say, give it a try with common household items before you buy any products for that. Martin Pattison asks, "What are your thoughts about using a brown box on vintage tube amps?" That's absolutely fine. If you want to do that, just make sure that whatever you set it to, the heaters are not dropping below about 5 volts. Basically, the job of the brown box is to set it to wherever the heaters are pretty much kind of be around 6.3 volts. That's closest to the wall voltage that was common when that power transformer was chosen. Uncle Meat says, "Sorry, was asking about thunderstorms and tube amps, lightning. That N makes a big difference. I don't know whether I misread it up above or if typos just happen to all of us. They certainly happen to me. Sometimes verbal typos on my videos. Yeah, if you have a bad thunderstorm, don't have your amps powered on, and I would in fact say unplug them from the wall. That's the cheapest way to protect them in the case of a lightning hit and a big power surge. You can get little power strips which have fuses and stuff. I don't know that they'll always trip fast enough to protect against lightning. And there's a lot of stuff out there that says it is, and even guaranteed to protects against lightning or your money back. I don't know whether they would honor that with a $2,000 tube amp or whether they just send you another $40 outlet strip. Let's see. Hey from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Well, hey, Edward. Hey from Memphis, Tennessee. Let's see. I scroll down too fast because that's what I do. Barberton, Ohio. Sorry. Michael Sternberg asks, I have a 70 silver-faced Princeton reverb. Vibrato sounds weak, but main problem is reverb. Input jack kind of fell off and into the chassis. It was working without the pedal for a while. Well, I have to tell you, and I mean this nicely, you don't need to try to do anything to fix that amp. You need to take that amp to a tech because it's probable that multiple little small things are wrong, but there is high voltage inside, and based on the way you phrase, the question and describe things, I think it's time to take it to a tech. It's probably a simple fix. Angry Shoebox, how slow is this YouTube slow mode? Seems even slower now. It's at 1 minute because I was getting an awful lot of fast stuff. And if this turns out to be too slow for people to enjoy it, I will not do it this long in the future. It's not something that I can change once the video is started. I have tried. Um, I'm still trying to find the balance because I just had questions going so fast, and I do not have someone sitting in the next room um, being an admin and cherry picking questions for me. That's one of the differences between me and the big boys. The others is basic professionalism and money. Uh, Lyle, I'm going to Gary Power says, Lyle, I'm going to recap a Silverface, I guess, Vibro Champ soon. I've heard you mention the mid resistor a number of times. What value would you use in it? Also going to a W8C and considering a new baffle with a WGS 4 ohm 10 inch. The Vibro Champ is a 15K mids resistor because they did not want it to sound as good as a Princeton or a Deluxe Reverb, which had a 6.8K. If I would put at the very max a 6.8 or 7K in there, I would also say it's a small cabinet, tends to be boxy. Don't be afraid to go down as far as 1K. So it's a real simple thing to get a 10K pot, temp it in, turn it, say, hey, I like it there. I really like it there. Turn it down a little bit, no. Up a little bit, no. Right there is where I like it. Then you remove it from the circuit, measure where that pot is. You're just using lugs 1 and 2 to do that. It's a variable resistor, and you measure it and say, oh, I like a 4.2K. Well, I've got a 3.9K and I've got a 4.7K. One of those is going to be pretty close. I'll pop that in. Hey, I love it. Move on. But 15K, I think, was Fender handicapping the Champ in comparison to the more expensive models. Hello, Rob F. Philip says, hey, Lyle, I love the lava flow and use 2 often. Wow. Want to switch the switches to soft 3-pole double throw switches. What would you recommend? I'm a bit confused. I believe on that, I did all the switching. It's been many years. I believe I did all the switching using just single pole, single throw. I mean, they were double pole, double throw switches physically in the pedal, but I believe, or might even 3-pole. But I think I was just using 1 pole of each one because I was actually triggering a transistor. Let me look at that old schematic and see if you guys can hang on just a minute. This won't take but a second, hopefully. Let's see. I know this is exciting for the rest of you. Jupiter products, pedals. It's not there anymore. Must be an old or something. I've got it here somewhere, but I don't know where it's gone. Well, Philip, shoot me an email on that, and I will find out that information. But I believe that if you just want soft switching, there are 2 kinds of soft switches out there. There's latching, which is much harder to do in a quiet pedal, and momentary, which is what most of the quiet switches are. They're momentary. So there's nothing physically moving. So that's a very easy thing to do, but that's a different way of using a transistor that takes over from that momentary signal. So you may not be able to do what you want to do, even if I only use 1 pole. I was doing it with latching. Darren Farrell, greetings from Ireland, Lyle, or Ire. Many of my friends are now fellow followers. Keep the great content coming. Thank you very much. Fellow followers is fun to say. V times fast. Angry Shoebox says 1 high power single-ended tube amp I can think of because I have one is a Supro Delta King 12. Well, it's not really high power single-ended tube amp. It's not that much wattage, and it's really built as cheaply as possible. So I still think that if you want more output, go to push-pull, like everyone in the world decided in 1955. And I forgot on the champ, yeah, a 10-inch speaker does sound better than the 8-inch speaker. The next question reminded me of that. Dustin Thiessen says, friend of mine is beginning his career building amps. I've commissioned him to build me a 6G2, planning on a 12-inch of some sort. Any speaker suggestions or mods to the original circuit? 6G2 would might be a difficult thing to do if your friend really is beginning his career building apps. Hopefully, he's built a lot. A 6G2 can have some issues if it's your first rodeo. I would suggest an Alnico. If you want something more like what would have been in there in the previous period, the 50s Tweeds, which is a great combination for that amp. But you can do ceramic. See my video on the Sur Ombre, where I discussed the speaker that John used versus some speakers I might prefer. But check out that video and see what you think about the Celestion V-type that John used in that. This is pretty much the same circuit. If I want, it's Q says, if I wanted to get Carlos Santana's tone, which manufacturer would you suggest? Marshall or perhaps Sir or Dr. Z or Friedman? That's tough because which Carlos Santana tone? Are you talking Soul Sacrifice at Woodstock? Are you talking Abraxas? Are you talking the stuff since then where he shows up to the studio and all the backing tracks are done and he just plugs in and does that big saturated thing with delay? So there's not a single Carlos Santana tone, but the one that I would listen to again without being paid would be the Woodstock Soul Sacrifice, which I think was just turning up a dual showman really loud. Dr. Matt Walton says, early 60s Gibson GA79 RVT. Have you had one on your channel? Thoughts on this amp? I don't think I've had a GA79. I've had quite a few early 60s Gibsons, and they're all very different amps from each other. And sometimes 62 of one model is a totally different amp than the 61 or the 63 of that same model. So they changed what was inside the 10 a lot. Boris asks, any experience with an AC15CH? There is one used locally with a 2x12 greenback cab under 1K. Any reason to be concerned over onboard attenuator causing damage to amp? I have not had the head models in which have built-in attenuators. I don't know that if they're done well, if they're done poorly, if they would damage the amp. It may be a case of doc, it hurts when I do this, in which case you hopefully know the answer. But unless they change something else in that circuit that I'm unaware of, that's a good choice for that budget. I'm not a huge fan of the 2x12 greenback cab, but you can always change speakers, or you may love it. Many people do. Paul P. says, hi, Lyle. It's Paul, another from Scotland. I'd like to ask, I have a twin amp, Evil Twin. It sounds mostly great, but every so often while playing, I will suddenly hear crackling. Well, the Evil Twin is got a main board with a lot of 9-pin jacks and even more. They have some very complicated jacks on that as far as the switching and normaling goes. And many pots and switches. And over time, if all the hardware beneath the knobs is not tight, those solder joints like to crack. And the amp is typically full of gray Illinois brand capacitors, which they're better than the ones used from the 90s on. But by this point, the ones from the late 80s are often overdue. That can even be the small value cathode bypass caps, the little 15 and 25 volt ones, 16 and 25 volt ones. So I imagine that a visual inspection of the amp would probably reveal some broken or semi-broken solder joints, um, possibly some leaking capacitors. They tend to leak at the positive end, including the small values. Sometimes there's heat damage in the low voltage supply. The same circuit from your evil twin was used for the low voltage supply in the Hot Rod and Blues DeVilles, and they burn in the exact same way. The 5-watt resistors, the 5-watt Zeners, they burn that area of the board, and they burn their associated capacitors. So that's what I would ask one of your local Scottish techs to look at. Um, and it's fairly easy to work on. I think I've got a 94 Evil Twin up on my channel somewhere, but it's been a while. Uh, didn't mean to scroll down. I think sometimes it's just like, hey, you're gonna go down. Uh, let's see here. All right, I'm back. My Dell Teaching says, hi, Mick in France, near the Alps. Bonjour. Bonsoir. Do you have any experience with or opinions on the Hughes and Kettner tube amps from Germany? I've had a few at different price points. They're a frustrating blend of extreme high quality and stupid little cheap things. Like they'll have really complex MIDI switching done very well, but then all the grounds we made with quick connects to the chassis, and they all corrode or they're never tight from the factory. I find most H&Ks are trying to do too much at once to do any one thing particularly well. And the illuminated Perspex front panels are a financial money pit should or when something goes wrong with them. Maybe if you're actually in Europe, you have better support from H&K, but they don't. They're pretty cruel to their U.S. customers as far as replacing the lighting elements and things as soon as that warranty expires. So they're very over-engineered, I think in some very optimistic ways, but it's possible to get very good sounds from them. RJ Electric says, thoughts on the Marshall Silver Jubilee reissues. I got a 2015 last week. Sounds great, but haven't needed to open it up yet. The EQ is almost too responsive, unlike other Marshalls I've had. Well, yeah, the Silver Jubilee, the 2550, etc., has a very different EQ than other Marshalls. In fact, it has one of the best clean sounds of any Marshalls ever as a result. The bass pot, especially because it's a dual gang pot and its function is split across two different gain stages. So it does sound and behave very differently from other Marshalls. I like the Silver Jubilee sounds. I find the LED compression the LED overdrive clipping a little bit too compressed, but it's a thing. I wish you could really go from clean to overdrive to dirty remotely. You're pretty much have to choose between one sound or the other. It doesn't really switch very well. You have to change your levels. But each sound that it does is a good sound. The reissue is a pretty good amp. However, they use little 16 millimeter alphas, which are not a bad thing. But in conjunction with the lead-free solder that they use, those pots are very prone to developing what's called a tin whisker. And oftentimes just compressed air will blow that out, but and it's not the only amp that does that, but that's the main difference between a reissue and one from 87, 88 is that the pots like to short out randomly for no good reason. It just happens. Let's see. Michael Sternberg says, New York City, have you heard Universal's Dream Pedal? Your thoughts? I'm actually going to get a Dream and a Ruby and learn myself up on them. Oh my God, I love you so much. Thank you, Lev. You rock. This is my wife. She rocks. I'm actually going to get the Dream and the Ruby from my buddy's shop. I was hoping to do it this weekend, but I had a family thing, and maybe that'll be the 30K subscribers video I do for everyone. That hey, these are so good. I'll be out of a job soon. So thanks for subscribing. Be nice to know you. I doubt that they're that good, but I expect that they'll be highly usable. I want to know what they really sound like and how they're built, how long they're likely to last, and whether I would be as happy with one of those going straight into this little Mac here as I am with an actual deluxe reverb, even a reissue. After I do a few little things to that reissue. Doug Ullman says, I really identify with that. I think he means the Dream pedal. I bought a 15 watt amp I'm afraid to bother the neighborhood with past 9 p.m. Well, yeah, it can have its role, especially in a New York apartment. This is that 100 watt Rivera that I just recapped. The new caps came in for it. And I'm talking to you. And I'm talking over it. And there are tricks I could do. If I needed it to be lower in volume than that, I could plug a cable into the effects loop, just a cable, and then the ascend and return level would come into play. I'd have a second master volume. I could get this really quiet. Let me turn this down even more. So that's as quiet as it is capable of going without doing the effects loop second master volume. So this is a 100 watt amp using its master volume. So just for practice, this is fine. The neighbors would not hear that. No one in another room would hear that. 100 watt amp with a master volume down that low is kind of a silly thing, but it can be done. So if it's truly for practice, almost any amp with a master volume is fine. It's when you want to record without the neighbors hearing, without the Dreams become effective, or the load boxes with IRs. But as far as a practice scenario goes, of course, I'm an old fogey apparently, because I still think this is the best practice amp. And if you can run through all the stuff you want to do on electric on one of these, when you get to the electric, it's like butter. And Brad's Guitar Garage. Hey, Brad, if lightning just jumped 1.5 kilometers of air, it's not going to give a shit about your special surge protection device. Well, amen. Hence my suggestion of unplugging the amp from the wall. Jason Perry asks, have you seen the new PRS HDRX amps? Any thoughts? I have seen it on many YouTube videos. Mysteriously, about 20 different YouTube channels all got that brand new amp on the same day. And they all said wonderful things about it. I'm pretty sure they also said wonderful things about the C and H series amps that have been out for a while, both of which are absolute turds. I don't have any high expectations of the HDRX, but I have not had one in there because I'm not one of those channels that gets new products every time 6 weeks before they're allowed to share them with the world. I'm also do not have that kind of bank account. But if I get one in for repair that a client buys and I have to repair it, which will be after the warranty period, most likely, I hope I have good things to say. Clyde Broadway asked, am I allowed to change tubes myself if no tech is available? Well, bad news, Clyde. We had a talk the other day. You weren't in the room, but we decided that everyone else in the world was allowed to change their own tubes except you. Sorry, Clyde, you're just not up to it. Yeah, of course you can change your own tubes. Two things. First of all, wait till they cool down because they will burn your fingers. Second of all, know that in a cathode biased amp, you need to buy a matched quad or pair, depending on the amp. And with a fixed bias amp, you may need to learn how to bias your amp. There's a lot of depending. If you have a Mesa or 5150, there's no bias adjustment built into there. You just make sure that your new quad is matched and you're fine. But if you may want to learn how to bias an amp, but yeah, you can do it yourself. Even you, Clyde. Let's see. Curtis Everett says, "What is a death cap?" In a lot of older amps, Fenders, etc., that had a two-prong power cable, which did not have a grounded third prong. One side was just run. Either one side was run to chassis through a capacitor, and you had a 50-50 chance of getting the wrong side and potentially electrocuting yourself. But in theory, you would have the hot wire going to the hot outlet and the neutral going to chassis through that cap. However, because the prongs at the other end of the cable were the same size, you could plug it into the wall either way. You had a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Later amps, even those which had grounded power cables, would still have that cap to ground, and often a switch where you could say, all right, it'll be on the hot or it'll be on the neutral, whichever's quietest. The trouble is, over time, those caps fail, and you can actually have AC potential between the chassis of the amp and ground. Live voltage, basically your chassis becomes live. And I've measured as much as 120 volts from chassis to ground, which means that the potential for death is there if you touch something which is connected to the chassis, for instance, your guitar strings, and then you touch anything else in your environment, which is at ground. Now, that I measured the voltage, which is not the same thing as the current there, because I did not want to set up take the time to test what the potential current was, because that doesn't matter. I am not here to say, oh, it's okay, you're only going to have a mild shock. I'm here to say you're not going to have any shock. If I work on a customer's amp, it needs to be as safe as humanly, physically possible before I send it back out into the world. So I'm not going to tell someone, oh, yeah, there's 120 volts potential, but there's no real current, because the next week that cap could fail in a different way, in which case, yeah. And yeah, it'll kill you if you touch your bass's strings while he's playing, while you're on stage. So basically, you want to have it so there is never any potential for that chassis to be live. And so the death cap, which has not been safety code for decades, needs to go away. And for those who say, well, that's great if I have a grounded power, but what if I play this stage and then there's no ground? I need to have that death cap I need to have that cap so it's quieter. If you're playing somewhere and there's no safety ground, don't play there with an electrical amp. If it's your house, I'm sorry, I know it's a hardship. Get a model or something where you're not dealing with high voltage. That's where the Dream is great. Plug into the Dream, record it into your computer. All that stuff does not need a safety ground. Listen back on headphones, because your power amp does need a safety ground. But if you're playing at a stage and they don't have a safely wired outlet, don't play there. Tell every other musician, we're going to boycott this venue until they stop taking our lives for granted. I know that sounds really crazy, but I've been electrocuted on stage way too many times. And not everyone who gets electrocuted dies, but everyone who gets electrocuted on stage remembers that shit, and we don't appreciate it. Chris Quinn says, speaking of your live chat photo, the quality of different pots? I know brands have different varying reputations, but I don't hear enough about different spec pots and where to get the higher spec ones. Yeah, well, I've got that 335, and nominally it has 550K pots in it, and I'm going to be changing the pickups and the pots in it in the coming month or so. And the pots that are in it seem to measure pretty high, and they may be, in fact, be the 550K made for Gibson by CTS, but they have a lot of resistance to being turned. There's a lot of torque necessary to move them. And I like on a telly, I want to be able to roll it real fast with my pinky, real fast with a telly, pretty fast with a Strat. And on Gibson, I don't do as much swells because there's two pickups and you can't really do the swell thing. But I want it to turn pretty easily with one rotation of my pinky. And the stock pots in that 335 are real stiff, and it takes basically takes two tries to get them to turn all the way because of the stiffness. So I knew that I wanted some new pots, and I knew that the historic spec 335 didn't take the ultra long bushing pots, and these CTS Mojo Tones, the Mojo Tone vintage tapers, are made for them by CTS, and they have enough resistance that they won't move if I don't want them to, but they have fairly low resistance. So once the knob's on here, I can I can't quite do the telly thing, but that turns real easy, real fast. I won't have that little bit of stubbornness fighting me when I play. And I measure them all as they came to me. And this one measures 545K. This one measures 509K, 536K, 515K. So I will probably put the two that measure highest on the neck pickup, and the two which have slightly lower measurements on the bridge pickup. And I'll probably be very happy with that. I'm not sure beyond that what specific questions you're asking. I like to have a good audio taper. This is actually almost a 30% taper, which is correct for the instruments they're going into. Some people have never played around with different values, but a nominally 500K CTS pot can be anywhere from 400K to 600K, with most of them being between 475 and 515 in my experience. And so some of these are a good bit higher than that. That rotation matters a lot to me, the torque, the fact that these are brass, not aluminum or pot metal, that means a lot to me. Especially with a split shaft knurled, I want that to be brass. It's going to last a long time. And I have found that these Mojo Tone CTS pots, the vintage ones, the vintage tapers that they sell, are really good choices. In the past, I've also liked the Emersons, which StewMac seems to have been selling almost exclusively until the supply chain issues. I don't know that anyone has got those Emersons now in stock. I used to like the RS Guitar Works quite a bit. They seem to only sell them in wiring harnesses now, not individually. So if necessary, though, if I just had to do it, I'd get a straight CTS pot and just, if I needed 4, I'd buy 10 and go through them and see which ones measure where I want and felt the best. Nicholas Ribagliati. I'm trying to use a head. It happens with any head, and a power station in the loop of an HF effects. As soon as I connect the send of the HX to the input of the amp, I have oscillation. Ground loop. I don't think HX effects. That's the modeler. That's the HX stomp or the full helix. I don't know if maybe the HX effects is a different model than I'm aware of. I would think that you would want to use a head. I guess the HX effects has got a guitar in that, for stuff you put before the amp, and then send to the amp, and then it comes back from the amp to stuff you want after the amp, then to the power station. As soon as I connect the send of the HX to the input of the amp, I have oscillation, ground loop. I don't think that's a ground loop, but you may have some configuration odd in the HX effects with which I'm unfamiliar, obviously. It could be a series parallel kind of thing. I would contact line 6 in this case, and I'm sorry. It's always tempting in this kind of situation to pretend to know the answer because I want to be the guy who knows things. It's much better for everyone, including me, for me to occasionally say, "I don't know. Don't know. If I had it here, I'd figure it out, but I don't have it here, and someone at line 6 should know that and be glad to help you." Michael Fuller says, "I love your videos about AC15C1. You talk about sweetening, and I can't send mine to you. Would you recommend changes?" Thank you, Michael. Sweetening the AC15C1. The number one things to do on that app, uh, there's a resistor, a 330K resistor in series before the volume pot on the normal channel. I don't have one handy to tell you that resistor number, but it's right there by the volume pot. It's 330K. That resistor, if you jumper it, that channel sounds nicer, sweeter, if you will. Trying to think if there's anything else that I think I should give out for people to do. Not because I'm being stingy with information, but working on amps is tricky. There's not a lot I would recommend the average user do on that. You can play around with different preamp tubes, maybe 5751, maybe even a 12AY7. But it's a pretty good sounding amp, even out of the box. Put it this way, for as much as I work on Voxes, work on amps in general, the thing playing there on the iPad in the background is a playlist of me working on a 63 AC30. As much as I'm capable of changing the sound, if someone said, "Hey, man, we want you to join us on stage tomorrow night and just sit in with us for a couple hours. My buddy just bought a brand new AC15C1. Can you play? You're okay playing with that?" But sure, no problem. I would have no issue using the bone stock amp. So Jason Perry says, "Ha, professionalism can mean many things, and I think you're head and shoulders above in that department." Well, damn it, I thought I brushed off before I started this video. Head and shoulders my butt. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. It's right. It's only slow because we're only just getting started. Sage Hero says, "Thanks for the videos. Really great stuff. Can I ask what your concern is with lunchbox apps?" I just, there's so much stuff joined to put together in a very small space, and things get hot, and there's no space around things. It's just a way of accelerating the normal stress failure modes of any tube app. The more compact everything is with the less airflow, the more likely you are to have issues. Now, Vox Night Train definitely has heat related issues. Predictable bad things happen in that amp, and it doesn't sound that great to begin with. The victories I've had in have had relatively minor things, and I cannot guarantee that they were caused by the heat. But two of them were heater uh, balance resistors that burned, and the artificial center tap resistors for the heater supply. And I don't know whether it was a tube that went south and did a heater to plate short, or whether it was just getting too hot. I don't know, but I have. It's harder to service them. Everything's jam packed together. It seems like a great idea from a marketing perspective, not so great from a long term usability of the amp perspective. And so it's a concern that I would have. And you're not saving that much size and weight with that form factor over a traditional small box. Des Vega, thank you very much about taking the time to help with the lava flow. And I will look that up after this on the lava flow. Thank you. Uh, Jay Bognap says, "Hello from Muskego, Wisconsin. I've got a PV Bandit. It plays for 5 minutes, then a major volume drop. Any thoughts, please?" Yeah, I believe that Bandit has got a thermal sensor on its output transistors. Many solid state amps too. If you look at that Deluxe 112 Plus from the other day, which is a 1994-ish Fender solid state design, most of those amps have a little thermal sensor on their output stage. If it gets too hot, it shuts off the output. So you need to take it to a tech who will find why it's getting too hot. That could be a failed cap. It could be a transistor which is drawing the wrong amount of current. It could be a lot of things. It could just be that the old thermal compound has desiccated and everything needs to be wiped clean, new thermal compound put in place, and all the transistors bolted back in place and everything screwed tight and the solder joints retouched. So it could be something very simple. But with a solid state amp that cuts out after about 5 minutes, that's a pretty good indication. It's most likely saying, hey, this is too hot. I'm not going to catch on fire. I'll stop, which is if you think about it, it's trying to be your friend. Let it. Doug Ullman says, I'm still choosing this over football. My ADD is always on standby, watching your channel. Thanks, Doug. I have chosen this over football consistently. I'm not a sports ball kind of guy. Sorry. Paul P. Sorry, didn't complete my question. Wanted to know if it's most likely tube related, and if so, preamp or power. Thanks a lot. Paul P. I'm sorry, I don't remember what the original question was. If you can repeat that for me, I'll try to get to it. Brooks says, as a tech, what have you found the most interesting or frustrating thing about Dumble amp circuits? I don't think there's anything frustrating about Dumble circuits except for the goop, which is just stupid. So when something goes wrong underneath that goop, puts the tech and the owner in a big dilemma. Interesting things about Dumble amp circuits. Well, it gives us gives techs a lot of jokes about crystalline matrices and stuff like that. I find they're not that interesting. I find a couple of the things he did. Okay, he's a big fan of local negative feedback, and okay, yeah, he likes certain kinds of asymmetrical clipping here and there. I'm not saying it's uninteresting, but I think way too much focus is paid on that. And at the risk of being very controversial, and if I am, it's not to be the guy on YouTube is controversial. The Dumbles sound really good. So do well-maintained Fenders. There are a lot more really good condition 66 Super Reverbs than there are 1976 overdrive specials in the world, whatever. When you hear Carlton, when you hear Robin Ford, when you hear Stevie Ray play a Dumble, it tends to sound godlike. Stevie Ray sounded godlike through Fenders. Larry Carlton was probably at his most godlike on Kid Charlemagne. That was like a 58 Deluxe, Tweed Deluxe. Robin Ford sounds really great through a Super Reverb. While there are a lot of great guitarists who have sounded awfully great through their Dumbles, those guys sound really great through their other amps too. And there are a lot of blues lawyers in the world who have bought Dumbles or Dumble style amps, and they still sound like blues lawyers. So yeah, you get a great player going into a Dumble, they're going to sound great. Same great player into a 58 Twin, into a 66 Super Reverb, they're going to sound great. So I have no disrespect for Dumble. I disrespect the hype train, which is started about and around those amps. And it's not about Howard or Alexander. It's about the cult of collectors and fetishizers. John Mayer, if you like the sound of John Mayer, many do. If he plays a Dumble, he doesn't sound great because of the Dumble. I mean, the guy probably played it for years through an amp just like anyone else can afford. And he made some money. He bought a Dumble. He made some money. He hired Pino Palladino. These are things that you dream of doing, and he got the opportunity to do it. And he did. That's great. But if you think he's a great guitarist, it's not because of the amp he's plugged into. That said, a great amp makes it easier for the great player to realize what they hear in their head. But look at Bonamassa. He was using Dumbles. He was using all these things, and now this week he's using all tweed Fenders. A year from now, he may go to nothing but 1968, but only June of 68 Marshalls. We'll have to wait and see. Let's see. Edward LaRose says, "Hey Lyle, what would cause a faint afternote only at very high volumes in a Marshall 18-watt circuit?" I'm not sure how exactly to describe it, but it's not present at lower volumes. A faint afternote. That could be a couple of things. That could be a ghost noting in the filtering. That could be um, an artifact of asymmetrical clipping. A lot of things that it could be, but afternote is too vague to go in beyond that. But if it's the kind of thing that bothers you or that's audible in a band context, that's one thing. If it's just something that's, never noticed that before, but I did last Wednesday, that might just make it sound more interesting. So keep an ear on it, see if it changes or gets worse, but it's not necessarily something to worry about. Many people say, Jatuka says, many people say something like this: "This Schwagang 12AX7 sounds much brighter than these JJ ECC 83 tubes. How often is this just pure imagination, or is it verified by a Bode plot or A/B test?" That's a good question, and I'm trying to decide how best to approach it because it's something that I see all the time. When I read tube descriptions, either on some forum or on a vendor's website, like a vendor will have tested all these different tubes in the same amp. Sometimes they're describing real things, and sometimes they have a word count that they need to meet. And I don't know what their sample sizes are. I've got 5 JJ ECC 83s right here. I know that if I were to be listening with my scope, I would probably be able to measure slight variances from tube to tube as far as the frequency response. I also know that in a circuit in a guitar amp where a lot of the frequency response differences don't matter, you're not hearing everything above 12K in one of these. The end result, as long as they're all, say, they're nominal 100, gain factor of 100, if they all have a nominal, if they are all actually measuring between 95 and 103 as far as the gain factor goes, I'm probably not going to hear a huge difference from tube to tube unless one of them has a problem. But if my entire raison d'etre is to find and describe differences in tubes, I might invent things that I'm hearing because it's very easy to do that. And our oral memory is short. And the time it takes to take a tube out, put the new tube in, let the new tube warm up, especially if you're not playing with a consistent signal, something on a loop or a sine wave or square wave, it's easy to invent things. That said, there can be real differences between tubes, but I'm not sure that if I tried 5 JJs and 5 Schwagang, that I would hear consistent differences between the Schwagang and the JJ. I might find 2 JJs and 3 Schwagangs that sound very similar to each other, and the others all sound different from those. The other thing which I have noticed myself, and let's see if this is something that I can communicate in a video. Different tubes from different factories have different diameters. And the proximity of a tube and the components inside a tube to a grounded tube shield can vary the frequency response. So if all the components are close to this grounded metal tube, once it's in place, things can be a little bit darker. If all the components are a little bit farther away, it can be brighter. And the glass of different tubes varies in diameter, such that a JJ or a Chinese tube tends to be fairly narrow in comparison to a Russian-made tube, say a Tungsol or Sovtek. And so you can have two tubes which sound very similar when they're in the amp, but if there's a tube shield, or even just the bayonet base from a tube shield, which is very, very close to the glass and to the internal components, it can actually make the tube sound darker than it would if there was no tube shield or even just a bayonet base. So sometimes it's real, sometimes it's imagined, sometimes it's real, but not for the reasons expected. All that said, okay, change the tube. It's a little brighter than the old tube. I'll just turn the treble down a little bit, or vice versa. And people are saying seemingly nice things about George Jika, or however it's pronounced. I don't think they've ever used his amps. Absolute garbage, should not be used by anyone. They're unsafe at any speed. Angry Shootbox says Santana's Woodstock amp was a solid state Galen Kruger, actually. Huh. I didn't know that. I thought I saw in the videos a whole bunch of dual Schumans behind him. Carlos played the first commercially available GK at Woodstock. Interesting. Well, makes the point that, the important factor there was Carlos Santana, and that he did not have the brown acid that day, which was not, in fact, too good. David S. Cheers from Newfoundland. Why is cathode bias sometimes called self-bias? Because it will find its own bias point, and it will typically share that same bias point among two or more tubes, depending on how many share the same resistor and capacitor. Hey, everybody, I'm going to step out for just a minute, and I suggest that if any of you guys want to do the same, we're right here pretty much at the hour mark. So if everyone takes a little 5-minute break, we'll come back and resume. I'm going to get a little more coffee and step out on the front porch for just a second and regain some sanity, and I'll be back. All right. Silent coffee. Yeah. I'm streaming at the same time as Pete Thorne. Well, I guess everyone's gonna leave. Uh the scope cable. Yeah, I just attached the probe to a quarter-inch jack attached to the output of the what do you call it? Mic pre. I just wanted something to move in the background as I spoke. I wasn't caring about it being precise. Why are Jika's amps garbage? I thought they were really outstanding amps because they're terrible. Uh, he had glued pyramids of caps with high voltage leads, like an eighth of an inch from the chassis. Uh, Tons and tons of underrated resistors that all burned. And then they were terrible grounds, terrible ground scheme, just amateur hour at extremely high voltage. And I don't know why anyone ever thought they were nice, though he has spent a lot of time telling people they are. Anyway, the Tweed acid. And I know it's back up to current now, and that just means I'm not going to scroll back up to wherever I was when I had to take a break. I went outside and hotboxed some sanity. I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions, and I'm sorry. So if anyone wants to re-ask whatever has not been answered so far, I'll try. But is the DSL-5 Marshall reliable and serviceable? I do not know. I have not had a DSL-5. Well, if anyone is choosing me over Pete Thorne, either I'm doing something right or you owe me money. Gently pressing the like button. Brad says the DSL-5 isn't too bad in his experience. I trust his experience, but I've not had one myself. First time watcher here, not that impressed, to be honest. Okay, well, Simon, what can I do to impress you? I'm sorry, you want your free back? Gregory Hill Sr., question for tone stack on a Fender Vibroverb personally made. Vibrato channel is muddy. What would be your suggestions on brightening this up? Love your detailed work and honesty. Vibrato channel should never be muddy on a Fender Vibroverb. First of all, make sure it's exactly as Leo designed it, including the 30% taper on the treble and volume pots. And I suspect if you're getting a muddy sound on a reverb channel of any Fender amp, the vibrato channel, something is not as designed. So I would go to that first. Rafael says, can you explain the ground scheme used on the Excalibur? Is that kind of ground scheme can be used on most amp? It's pretty much what I did on the Marshall ground video. Every stage, every component within a triode is grounded to the cathode point of that triode. Every cathode that shares a filter cap runs its ground to the filter cap for that stage. And then all the filter caps run to chassis in the sequence that they happen in the amp. That's most good ground schemes in a nutshell there. Sam Friedman says, hey, love the channel. Great way to demystify the classics. Thank you. Have a 2005 Savage Mach 12 with original caps. Recap even if test okay. Planning screen resistor up from 100 ohms to 1K, parallel 6v6 power. I don't know the Savage Mach 12 from 2005. Well, it's getting up on 20 years. I would probably not recap automatically if you don't have any hum issues or buzz or oscillation, and they're physically not leaking. I would certainly up the screen grid resistor from 100 ohms to 1K with or 470 ohms with 6v6. Ron Quest Main says, if you could have only two knobs on a custom amp, what circuit would you build? Gain, stages, tubes, and output. Just two knobs. I'd probably build a 5E3, single channel 5E3 deluxe. It Or you can do a slight variation on the same idea and come out with a something in between a Vox and a matchless. Tommy Mitchell says, hey, my Mike Landau DeVille's V1 tube sounds microphonic and is super loud when tapped, but when switched out with V2's preamp tube, the sound stays in V1. Thoughts and thanks. Well, V1 is always going to be the most sensitive tube in an amp for microphonics. You may have a bad solder joint. The issue about the microphonic tube is it only microphonic when tapping on it, which is a lot of vibration, or does it come through the chassis when playing? If it's the latter, you need to see if you have a solder joint or something. If it's only an issue if you are tapping on it, that's much more vibration than the amp will typically give it in real life. Hey, Lyle, Wes Chilton says, and thank you, Wes. Ever work on a Vox Cambridge reverb, the tube version? Yes, I have. Friend just bought a Mint all original one. Nice amps. It has a weird can filter cap, 40, 30, 10 at 350 volts. I don't think anyone makes that anymore. Well, you don't have to use that. They use that because it was cheap. This was Thomas Organ's era of making some Vox branded amps in America. Had nothing to do with the JMI circuits. So instead of 40, 30, 10, you could get something with 40, 40, 40 or a four section. I would probably do a four section 20 microfarad or 22 microfarad at 450 volts or 500 volts, because that's a common cap. And then you could just say, all right, it's going to be 40, 20, 20 and 40 or 40, 40, 20. You're not going to have any difference. It might be any difference you perceive between that and 40, 30, 10 will be an improvement. Our current JJ, me, myself, and IS, our current JJ 7027s or any other tubes capable of handling an early 70s MPEG V4. I've read they're just relabeled 6L6s. I don't know off the top of my head. I believe on the last V4 I did Zener diodes on the screen supply to drop them by about 40, 50 volts. I don't recall precisely right now, so that any 6L6 could be used in that amp. And it was a fairly transparent thing to do sonically. It was a punishing design, but I don't know if the JJ 7027 is a true 7027 or if it's a relabeled 6L6. Steve Lark says, what would cause low-level background distortion on a 68 Super Reverb? Cheers, mate. Well, it's typically going to be an issue with electrolytic capacitors. It could also be a problem in, as you might have heard in the video on the 68 Custom Deluxe Reverb the other week, where it had a bad reverb driver tube that was causing a similar thing. But I would first look at electrolytic capacitors especially if it's an actual 68 Super Reverb. And it scrolled down too fast. Lee Tintle says, hey, Lyle, I'm getting a 69 Pro Reverb. Great amp. And thinking about adding a mid spot and or a PP, a post-phase inverter master volume. Do you know if there's room for a pot to replace the ground switch and or the receptacle? I would not put anything involving the audio where the receptacle or ground switch are on a probe, because that's all on the AC mains wiring. And you want to keep your audio AC as far from your power AC as possible. The mid spot, um, I would say don't drill a 69 Pro reverb. The mid spot, you could put an internal mid spot because it's just wired as variable resistor, or you can just experiment and find the resistor that you like. Probably going to be between 2K and 6.8K, the stock. As far as the post-phase inverter master volume, that can be very useful in that amp. If you're not going to be using it with external cabs, I would say the best way to do it would be to remove the auxiliary speaker jack, because it's already a 3/8 inch hole. Put your post-phase inverter master volume there. Don't do the 4-cap version, do the 2-cap version, so you don't have to chew the, mod the amp permanently. It could always be put back and it would be fine. Do as little change to those as you need to do to be able to use it. Rob Beff says, I have beginner hybrid amps, 12x7 preamp and solid state power section with single tone pot, considering EQ in the effects loop for proper tone stacks. Good idea. If so, parametric or graphic EQ. Man, that's tough. You're not going to emulate a proper tone stack at that point in the circuit, because a proper tone stack is a lossy tone stack. It's subtractive, and you have to have makeup gain for that to work. I would say at that point, if you're going to put something in the loop to control the EQ, use whatever you have or whatever sounds good to you, but don't think of it as being like a what you'd find in a quote real amp. Just find something that works and don't sweat it. Matt Johnson, do you remember the first time you played a vintage JMI Vox? Any good story behind it? God, it's been a long time. I remember it was really noisy, and it had the puddles of wax underneath the transformers, which are common especially on the ones used in the United States. At 120 volts, 60 hertz versus 110, 50 hertz. I remember being very intimidated by it because there's so many components and so many wires, and it's really hard to know what's what. And when I finally got to the point where it's playable, and I played like a G chord, it just sounded so perfect. It was one of the first times when you're like, oh, this is what I've been hearing on all those records all my life. And wow, I can do that. I can sound like that guy. It's just a G chord. The blinding speeds of notes of fury did not come with that, but it's like, oh. And if I play harder, it sounds like AC/DC. And if I play quieter, it sounds like Pink Floyd. It was like, and I had similar experiences when I first played a really great Vibrolux reverb, really great 72 Marshall. It's like, oh, now I see why all these guys want these things. And it's not because you can only get those sounds if you have the expensive esoteric amp, but it sure makes it a lot easier, especially when all of a sudden your right hand becomes the overdrive pedal. Jeremy Green asked your thoughts on keeping a vintage amp stock versus changing components for top performance. At what point do you stop? I think I covered that pretty well with the response about the 69 Pro. I try to keep everything as stock as possible. I think if you're going to be, with it, or at least not drill I'll make changes to a reissue that I would not make to an original. If you have a vintage amp and you don't like the way it sounds stock, and it's in good condition stock, everything's working perfectly stock, and you don't like that, get something else. Let someone else have the original stock amp. Uh, I debated whether to answer this. A guy asked, "If you're that good, why are you not more well known?" Well, I got almost 30K subscribers. I've been on Tone Talk. Other YouTube channels know who I am. I mean, I think I'm pretty well known within a very niche industry. I think some people are troublemakers and or just don't know how to speak to humans. So, if you want to hang out, be cool. And I'm a big boy, but if you're that good, why you're not more well known? I don't know who the fuck you are. So, touche. Uh Is there really Robot Song says, "Is there really something magical about matchless amps, or is it just marketing and scarcity? Same with Magnavox reissues. Have I interacted with any of the new Harmony amps like the H620?" I don't think there's anything magical about matchless amps. They're overbiased, really hot, unreliable copies of Voxes for the most part that happen to get played by some real good players, um, and they cost a lot. Um, I've had to do a lot of work to make matchless amps keep going, and work I don't think it should have been necessary to do. Um, and they're very hard to work on. That's not, oh, it's so hard. That translates into it takes more time, it costs more for the owner for no good reason. The Magnavox reissues, Magnatone reissues, I think they seem fine. I've not had any of the complicated ones with like the stereo uh, trim or anything, the harmonic trim. But they're good amps. Some of them have had some design flaws, but they've got lots of different models at very different price points. So I don't have one opinion of them. I have not had any of the new Harmony amps in. I have had actual old Harmony amps in, which were wonderful sounding, terrible things. Um, I scroll down too far, too fast. Uh, sh- Des Vegas says, "Do you ever listen to Little Feat?" I'm 32. When I tell people they're my favorite band of all time, they just look at me like, "Who?" And also, I sent a super chat you barely missed from pre-break. Well, thank you for the super chat. I'm sorry that I missed that. Everything is just piling up. Um, yeah, and I listen to Little Feat. Sometimes I am the fat man in the bathtub, and I have seen the Bright Lights of Memphis, and I know a lot of their other songs that aren't ever on the radio. Memphis and New Orleans, in a lot of ways, are culturally and musically certainly sister cities. So yeah, Little Feat is always welcome here. Lowell George is a phenomenal singer, uh, and he sang with his guitar too. Andreas JL says, "It is safe for the bass amp to change the noisy 2300 RPM fan and Ampeg port effects to a low noise, lower RPM fan." Um, I'm sure that you can get a brushless motor fan that'll be fine. And I'm not familiar with the Portaflex PF500, so I don't know how much airflow is necessary. But certainly between 2300 and 2200, yeah, you could use that. I would look for, you might find something that's already 2300, 2500 that's a quieter fan. Day Sleeper says, "Hey Lyle, I have a Laney LC30 Mark One that needs attention. Are they difficult to work on? Worth it. Hard to find info online about them. The issue is that the inputs need attention. Bad solder joints, I think." I've worked on one. Uh, Input jacks, if they need attention, give them some attention. The main problem with that amp was, as I recall, under wattage, undervalued screen grid resistors, and some kind of hinky construction, both of which were fairly easy to uh, to cure. But I'm sure any good tech in your area could sort out the input jacks issues. Thank you, Alex Aguado. Uncle Meat says, do or asks, do PV Tweeds have the same problems you describe as Mesa Blues Juniors? Sorry, as Fender Blues Juniors, Hot Rods, etc. They have some similar issues, particularly the Classic 30. The Classic 30 has got two resistors, I think, for the heater supply right at one end of the PC board, and um, constantly burns the board. And then the screen grid resistor is only on two of the four output tubes, and that fails, and they're prone to solder joints. And the Classic 50 has got some issues. Um, they're better amps than the Blues and the Hot Rod series, but not by a lot. And PV is pretty much gone, and some of the parts are very specific, and you won't be able to get direct replacements for much longer. So, I would probably avoid them. Hey, Andy, thanks for joining me, man. Thanks for all the great work in education, Lyle. 5 amps and counting. I thought you were done buying amps, or was that so last week? Thanks for making it, man. Hey, Lyle, I bought an 87 Marshall 2204 50-watt head. Frankenstein says, I can put it in standby. It will be quiet. When I turn it off, you can hear the guitar through the amp for about 10 seconds. Thoughts? If you just power it off without putting in standby, yeah, the caps are storing that voltage. So I'm going to try to do this on the screen. So you have voltage in those caps, and you play, and it can't draw more through the wall. So it still plays until it doesn't have enough DC to make sound anymore. And each time it get a waveform from the guitar, that DC drains out of the caps. So if you don't play through it when you power it off, that DC may stay up here for a good long while and gradually taper off as it bleeds through some resistors. But if you play, it's going to use all the DC it can, and it's going to fade out. That's actually just fine. Scott Wilcox, I'll have some updates soon. Yeah, troll feeding is most of the time I don't reply, but if someone's going to be in here, that means they're a subscriber, and I want them to know whether they need to be if they need to subscribe to me or not. Helps them make an informed decision. Hey, Charlie says, "Hey, Lau, would you bother with rectifier tubes anymore on a custom build, or just use diodes and mimic the sag?" Well, Charlie, in the Excalibur 15, much more on to follow soon. I'm emulating tube rectification with some very uh, carefully chosen and well implemented, I think, 5-watt resistors on the AC side of things. So on the secondary, those will emulate the voltage drop and provide the sag without all the heat and failure issues of a tube rectifier, without needing the separate winding on the power transformer for a tube rectifier, and one less thing to fail. So, producer man, my Les Paul is too heavy. Is there an exercise regime you'd recommend? By the way, great channel, Lyle. Thanks, man. Uh, Jimmy Page is like 5'8" and weighs as much as my pinky, and he's been dragging those things around the stage while in various states of inebriation. So I think you just either have to have the willpower or the dragon pants. And knowing most people, it's probably easier to go buy some really cool dragon pants. Conrad Borbas says, "Hey, Lyle, I love your vids." Thank you very much, Conrad. I had a question about headroom in amps. Would a 50-watt Marshall DSLR have the same amount of clean headroom as a Fender amp with the same wattage? Uh, I don't know about the actual headroom in a DSLR. I know that it is possible to have the same. It's possible to have more or less depending on what you're trying to do. I would say that most Marshalls are designed to have less clean headroom than most Fenders, because that's the stated intended purpose of the amp. But um, people all of a sudden worry about headroom so much, and is it pedal friendly? And I don't know. There's legitimate cause for concern as far as headroom. Like when I played that deluxe Tone Master, it did not have the right amount of headroom for a Fender, and when it did squash, it squashed hard like a cheap stomp box compressor. But if I were playing a JTM 45 next to a super reverb, they would each squash at a different place, and they do it differently, but each would sound awesome. So headroom is not really the issue so much as what happens when you run out of headroom. Does it still sound good? Does it sound interesting? Does it sound better? Or does it sound like you turned on a stomp box compressor from 1978 with a dying battery? I have not worked on any orange custom shop heads. I hope that they're fantastic. Jay Park says, hi, when you crank up amps, how much distortion does really come from power amps? Power tubes, I assume he means. Thanks very much. It depends on the amp. If you crank up an AC15, if you crank up a 5E3 Deluxe, almost all the overdrive you're hearing is coming from the output section. If you crank up a Fender Twin, almost none of the overdrive you're hearing is coming from the output section. If you crank up a Marshall 100 watt, almost none of the distortion is coming from the output section. If you crank up a Marshall 30 watt, a JTM 45, a good bit of the output of the distortion starts to come from the output. So it's not like there's a hard and fast rule, but you get say a 5150 or a Mesa dual rectifier. Those things have so much preamp gain, and the output stage stays really clean and pretty sterile. All the distortion you're hearing there is coming from the preamp. Bo says, Lyle, let's hear that Strat. Oh, it's both the Strats are over on the wall right now, and I don't have any yet plugged in. I've got a unplugged SG, and I've got the Southern Jumbo. The Strat needs to wait its turn, but you'll hear it again, I expect. Producer Man says, I used my HX Stomp on a large venue gig last week and have to say for pop gigs, I may never drag an amp around an amp ever again. Jazz gigs might be different. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I mentioned that as an option in the amps under $1,000 video. It's kind of depend on someone's tastes and budget, and your ability to hear a modeler. If you're using in-ears, it's almost a no-brainer. I'm not entirely convinced that they're going to replace tube amps for me yet, but every year the digital stuff gets better. I'm gonna try the UA stuff soon, and I'll try one of the HX things when I get a chance to. But my friend is not a Line 6 dealer, so it's a little harder for me to get access to that stuff. Brad says, when I get a sudden surge of concern questions from customers on a subject, I'll usually be able to trace it back to a viral video or forum post. Yeah. Do I know? Yeah. My guitar keeps going out of tune. Do you think it's a bad transformer? Howdy from Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Michael P. Have I done my ham radio license? No, I don't. I don't do anything with ham radio. Matt Johnson says, what are your thoughts on the phase inverter circuit with a bias on the grid on old high watt DR103s and 504s? I've always heard it helps keep the output section punchy and clean. It does. That's one of the reasons those amps are very clean. They also have slightly unusual application of negative feedback there. Um, I think that's a good trick to have in one's arsenal, as is the raw bias connection on pin 8, the suppressor pin of a EL84 that you find in some trainers. Maybe we'll combine all those in an amp one day. Day sleeper, let's hear the SJ. Okay, what do you want to hear? I think I dropped the SJ pit. Here it is. Do I play any slide guitar? Jason Perry says. No, by popular demand, I do not. And I don't know if this is going to sound any good through the 87 up here, because, that might be the thing. It's just that Beatles Stones thing. It just really gets that sound. A little out of tune because of changing the weather, but it's that kind of thing. Does a choke on a chassis require a specific orientation or distance regarding PT and OT? Usually not. Usually the choke is kind of an inert thing. If there's an exception to that, I've not run into it yet. Usually I try to put it where it fits and where it's as far from the preamp stuff as I can do. I've had some really complimentary things here pop up from James Blessed, Cut to Save 44, Tommy Mitchell, Elugo. Thank you very much. Best Amp 1K for blues rock. Check out my Amps Under $1,000 video. I've went into that pretty well. Maybe you'll find something there. Cut to Save 44, you're 9 hours away. I live in Roanoke, Virginia. I don't know what amp you have, Joe. Shipping is expensive and risky. But where did I get this repaired? I don't know where you got that repaired. But there are some good techs in Virginia and DC in that area. Tommy Mitchell, I am hoping in about 2 months, right after Christmas, to be able to accept amps again. And typically just the chassis, not the entire amp. It saves an awful lot of shipping costs and it really decreases the likelihood of things being damaged. Clyde Broadway says he got a Swartz Space Tone Tremolo used for $1,200. He's obsessed with it. That's a really good amp at a very good price. Thanks, Haggadis. Yeah, man, Day Sleeper, it's all about the split parallelograms. Okay, Steve Lark, he's getting into the real questions. Best barbecue spot in Memphis. I'll be traveling through the spring and want no food regrets. Okay, I got you, man. Cozy Corner. Cozy Corner has consistently the best ribs. And their chicken, their Cornish hens are great. Their sandwich is quite good, but their ribs are where it's at. There's a place out east whose name escapes me now because I only tried it once because it's out on Germantown Road in Cordova, and I don't get out there very often. It's out by the IKEA, and they have a really, at least the time I went out there, they had a really good pork sandwich. But if you're in Memphis proper, I would say Payne's if you are up for something on the spicy and tangy side. Kind of unusual. Pretty much anywhere you go in this town except Central Barbecue is fantastic. Avoid Central Barbecue like the plague. The 9 to 5 everyday barbecue people get might be tops for a sandwich, but their ribs are horrible. And if you get the barbecue sandwich in this town, you want to get it with slaw or don't get it at all. What's my preference for a post-phase inverter master volume in a 59 basement or plexi? Just the Larmar. Uh, yeah, the rib tips at Cozy Corner are great too. That's kind of like a pro barbecue level suggestion, like rib tips or burnt ends. That's not for amateurs. Beef. We have no beef ribs here, Brad. You got to go to Texas for that nonsense. It's all pork here. You can get some. You can get some good beef brisket in places around town here, but beef ribs way too fatty. Never seen a Holland amp. Do I have Nick Orr says, "Do I have experience with the Celestion G1265 Heritage? I enjoy the speaker, but wish I could find something similar that doesn't always sound quite as broken up." Um, that's a great sounding speaker. Um, if you like that, but you want something that's a little bit cleaner, try the Creamback 65 or the ET65. Thanks, Jim Selman. That's very kind of you. Barbecue Shop for sandwiches. Their sandwiches are good. Their slaw's got a lot of green bell pepper in it, which I don't quite care for. Um, um, I like the ribs though. Their dry rub is a little extra salty. Tops the sandwich. Yeah, get a jumbo extra sauce from Tops. But their cheeseburger is also phenomenal. Producer man, you were in Memphis for a week, but didn't hit any barbecue. I was very busy at the hotel breakfast bar. I weep for you. That's like going to New Orleans and only eating at the hotel. Memphis has got a lot of things that are messed up about it historically and today. But when it comes to music and food, if you go to Chicago, Memphis, or New Orleans and you don't eat something good while you're there, why are you even there? Robot songs. Hey, Lyle, I've tried to self teach many, many times over the past decade regarding circuit basics to understand the how of amps, not just the what. I can't seem to get it. Suggestions on resources. Um, I don't know if I'm the right person to ask for that. And I'm not saying this to be conceited. I just got it. Everything about this just clicked for me. And same way I used to do computer work, IT design, websites, databases. The same way I was an English major, and you deconstruct and you see the whole structure, narrative, and oh, okay, let's redo that, but from the third person perspective, and it's going to be better. I can step back and see all the things, and I can go real micro and get the individual little things, and it all just floats around here. And I can't take credit for that. It's like a party trick. I was born with it. And so I see things in ways that I don't read my fellow text I just to myself I describe things in ways that I never see other texts describing things. They're very much formulaic and um, a lot of math and stuff. And I do that. I'm capable of. I've done the work, but that's not how I approach it inside my noggin. So I don't know if my way is any way that I could teach, or even a good way to try to teach. I would say, as always, start by building pedals. And if you can say, I'm gonna make a tube screamer for bass, and I'm gonna change all the frequencies so that it really dials in all the frequencies I want to hear on a J bass versus a Strat. That will teach you a lot more than just kind of changing things randomly in a guitar amp, and it's a lot safer. Luis de Jesus says, "What is the benefit of a choke over a dropping resistor in a power supply?" Uh, Either can be fine if the entire power circuit is designed that way. If you have a power supply designed for a choke and you put in a resistor, odds are there's not going to be enough filtering because that choke filters a lot more than a resistor. For example, an AC15 with a choke, you may have 22 microfarad, and that's fine. AC15 done with a resistor, bless you very much, my dear, you may want to have ha ha. More on that in just a moment. AC15 with a resistor, you may want to have 47 microfarad, 100 microfarad. That's what the AC15 C1 does. We're 22 in my 100 because that resistor is not filtering as much. So you need to add some capacitance that you don't need when you have a choke. And true design of a power section is very complicated. And a lot of guys are just cutting and pasting from existing apps, and they introduce new mistakes. Sometimes they luck out and get cool things, but often it's just mistakes. Nikki just sent this to me. She is a transplant to Memphis from South Bend, Indiana, and Illinois, and LA, and Denver. And she just wanted me to let you guys know that if you're here, go to Gus's Fried Chicken, Gus's world famous fried chicken. And it is spicy fried chicken, and it is phenomenal. And I know that they've got franchises in like Dallas and LA and Denver and places now, maybe even Chicago. But it started about 70 miles away from here. And so the first franchise locations were here, and they are fantastic. And since I just plugged you on the internet, Gus's Fried Chicken and Cozy Corner, I want T-shirts and some free meals. Thanks, because that's how the internet works these days. I give you a good review, you give me money, or chicken, or barbecue, or a biscuit. Thanks. Nicor, yeah, the V30, the V-Type is okay. I don't think it's as good as the ET65 or the Creamback, but it's a good sounding speaker. It's just a little bit hard feeling in my experience, but that may be the amps I've tried it in. Valleywood Studio, can you explain speaker wattage and breakup as in a 30-watt speaker and a 20-watt amp opposed to 50-watt speaker? Are there generally accepted approaches for choosing? Well, if you have a 30-watt speaker and a 20-watt amp, that 20 watts is usually measured clean. And so that 20-watt amp is going to put out closer to 30 watts at peak, which can kill that 30-watt speaker. Up until such time as it does, that 30-watt speaker is going to be really having its most excursion, a lot of excursion and compression and introducing distortion of its own. And that's a sound that a lot of guys like. Just know that if you're going to do that, you may kill the speaker, which can be an acceptable risk to get a certain tone. Brian May has Blue Celestians 20-watt speakers, 15 20-watt speakers in his AC30s, which are essentially 40-watt amps, certainly the way he's playing them. And he goes on tour with dozens of spares as a result, and that's his decision. But he has a lot more money than the rest of us. So he can do that. If you have to say, oh, I don't want to blow up a $200 speaker, get a 50-watt speaker. Most of the speakers I put in a Deluxe Reverb, which is a 22-watt amp, 30 watts when pushed, are 50 to 65-watt speakers. But it depends on the amp. It gets real subjective. In general, I want to have twice. I want the speaker to have twice the wattage of the rating of the amp. Or if I'm, two speakers, each of which is at least the rating of the amp. Let's see here. Jeff Harper, is a Bugera V5 combo worth the money? Should it be avoided? All Bugeras should be avoided. Bugera is just copying other brands, and they're cheap copies of already cheap amps. I don't think that they have any respectability as far as IP goes. I don't like the company, and I won't support the company. And Behringer did the same thing to Mackie. Now Bugera is doing it to Behringer. It's the circle of suck. I think Elton John's working on that right now. That is a circle of life joke, not an Elton John obvious bad joke. Anyway, yeah, Uncle Doug's got a lot of how tubes work and stuff. That's good. And yeah, Brad gave Robot Songs a link to Rob Robinette's stuff as well. I'm glad you enjoyed Gus's, Scott. Gooden says after Lowell George died, Bonnie Raitt took part in a tribute concert. She said they really wanted to play Fat Man in the Bathtub, but they couldn't find anyone brave enough to try to sing it. Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. That must have been hard for Bonnie Raitt. I know that they were very close. There's some videos out on YouTube of a very young Bonnie Raitt and a very young Lowell George playing with a gig with I can't remember his name right now. His dad was the famous producer, and he's the famous son of the famous producer who plays blues so well. And I've seen him play a few times, and normally I would know his name instantly. Anyway, the three of them playing. John Hammond Jr. That's it. So John Hammond Jr. and Bonnie Raitt and Lowell George playing in like a Cambridge coffee shop in like 1969, 1970, and they were all kids. And Bonnie and Lowell were very much in love with each other, and all comes out through it. And everything about that is just perfect. So look for that if you're into really good music. Ken Neminsky says, thoughts on putting an effects loop in the trim channel of a Fender Showman. Now, Fenders don't need effects loops. They're already clean. There's almost nothing you can put into a Fender that's going to be distorted when it comes out. Or if it does, you're better off doing a wet dry setup if you really want it to sound professional. I think effects loops are fine if you're trying to cover all bases with an amp. But if you have an old Fender Showman, let it be what it is. Let it be of its time. Producer man, I don't have a lot of experience with JBL K130s. I know that both Weber and WGS have speakers based on JBLs and EVs, but I tend not to order them for clients because most clients don't want something that weighs that much. But if find out for yourself. Beyond that, yeah, I mean, yeah, producer man, the Elton reference was making fun of the circle of life Disney thing. I would never make a homophobic joke. That's not what I saw where that could be perceived, and I aborted. And if anyone's got a problem with that, get the hell off my channel. I'm not going to be making gay jokes or anything like that. I've got too many friends and family members, and I love them more than being a YouTube person. So if you got a problem, go away. Yeah, voltage dividers, screen grid resistors. There's just so much to learn robot songs, and you just got to chip away one at the block, one bit at a time, and you'll get there. Think of Michelangelo looking at that huge block of marble and seeing a statue inside it, and one chip at a time. Have I listened to The Truth About Vintage Amps? One of the episodes, Brian from Sour Sound talked about Transformers. Very interesting listen. I have not, but I will at some point. Pretty much the time that I have that's not working or family stuff is this. And so I don't listen to a lot of podcasts or YouTube videos about my day gig. And that's, is what it is. I hope it's fantastic, and maybe I'll check it out at some point, but I can't be nothing but amps all the time. That's one of the reasons I said earlier, when I punch the clock at the end of the day, I do this, and I've got a piano in there that from time to time, if there aren't amps on its bench, I play. Buck Talk 55 Dave E says, I've seen it said, but wanted to hear from a respected tech. Is the EV12L the best speaker for a Dumble? I don't know, because the best anything is subjective. And every 12L I've had in, even compared with the same or similar amps, has sounded very different from each other. So I don't know how consistent 12Ls are, or whether they're this year is consistent, but the next year sounds different. And I can't tell you whether you would love or hate a 12L in a Dumble. No one likes carrying it, but I guess the premise is if you have a Dumble, you can afford cartage or roadies. But an EV12L is one of the uh, most loved speakers for a Dumble, and that's going to be for reasons. But it also comes down to the cabinet design. The Dumble cab with the EV had the porthole in the back and all that. If you do that in a EV12L and a closed back Marshall, you may hate your life. Steve Lark, coffee question. What is your choice for a quality machine? We're in the market. I've got a Braun Brew Sense thing that I've been very happy with. It's the one that's like the stainless steel cube from straight on, and I've had no issues with it for the past 3 years. And I like it a lot. The true coffee snobs, the espresso machine guys, will look down their nose at it. Pardon me, but it keeps me sane, and I've not had to replace it. Jojo says, I have a microphonic preamp tube and a Vox AC15 hand wired. Should I replace only that tube or upgrade all of them? What brand? Um, I would hold off on replacing all of them unless you have a lot of money, because tubes are artificially expensive right now. Change out the one that's microphonic, and as to what brand, depends on what's in stock. And go for a good vendor. So Tube Depot, the Tube Store, Euro Tubes, etc. Don't buy from Sweetwater. Don't buy from Z-Zounds, etc. A lot of the big box places are great for other things, but the tubes are going to be overpriced, and you're not going to have any guarantee that you're getting anything good. And they're going to sell you uh, cryogenically treated blah blah blahs that are the same JJs and Softecs and Chinese tubes that everyone sells. The brand just changes. Get a good vendor, see what they have in stock. You'll be fine. And if it's V2 and an AC15 hand wired, which is a cathode follower, don't use any Russian tube. Use Slovakian or Chinese only, because otherwise it'll have a short life. Damajara, Lyle, quick views on Vibro King. Thanks. Yeah, I turned one into a real amp. I took out all the ground loop mistakes and the gain staging mistakes and the other mistakes. It's a crime how expensive that amp was. From everything to ground loops to crazy overspec gauges to terrible signal flow to, I mentioned ground loops, to every pot in the damn amp being a dual gang 500K linear that they would wire up in parallel as needed to get 250K, just saving crazy money in weird ways. And just terrible, terrible built amp, very noisy. I eventually made it fantastic. Lou Sequoia says, on a Tone Talk, George Lynch says he knows two persons who've blown their plexis output when using an aux. Any customers of yours who've had this issue? Lyle? No, but while I have some great, great customers, um, Dave Freeman's customers tend to be real big names that in LA, who are in a harder scene, who are tending to do, be more likely to have an old Marshall and an aux box. So most guys here who are using aux boxes that I know are using it with lower voltage wattage amps. Not as many people rocking the cranked Marshalls around here. But I do have questions about the aux box that I don't have answers to yet, because I don't have any personal experience of them. Yeah, robot songs. Yeah, that whole thing was just. Yeah, Jojo, if you're having a noisy V2, make sure you get a JJ or a current production Pisvane or TAD Chinese tube, and you'll be fine. Hey, Baron Guitar, thanks for joining us. I appreciate that. Wes Chilton says he uses a UA aux with his JMP 2203. Well, I hope you never have a moment's trouble with it, Wes. I've heard some things from some guys I respect saying that the aux is not perfect and may damage amps under certain conditions. And so, given the amount of information that I have, I would just urge people to do more research before buying one. I wish I could say definitively yes or no, or hell no, or this thing's fantastic, ignore the naysayers. But unless I have one come in for me to test and do a whole bunch of measurements on, I, I don't want to be the guy who's talking out of his ass just to have something to say on YouTube because the world's got enough of that. Um, I got to be honest. Well, we're here at 2 hours, and I think that's a good run for Sunday afternoon. I've got to do some grocery shopping for this coming holiday. Got to make some cornbread tonight, so it'll be nice and stale in time to make the cornbread dressing. And that is dressing, not stuffing. Very different things. So I think we're going to wind up about now. Thanks, Darren. Thank you to everyone for joining me. For those whose questions I did not get to, I apologize. I'm not going to have the time this week to do a follow up where I go back and answer the questions I didn't get to, like I did last week. I made that time, but that's something I won't be able to do reliably in the future. Man, thanks to Brad at Brad's Guitar Garage, as always, for helping out, moderating. If you're in Australia and you need a good guitar tech, he's fantastic. If you just want to know more about amps and you're sick of my yapping, Brad's Guitar Garage, his videos are fantastic. He knows his shit, and he says even cooler words than I do. And sometimes you hear like kookaburras in the background. It's crazy. Australia is a real place. Who'd have thunk it? See ya.